I have something special planned for today's show, and that is I'm going to help you improve the sound of your system, or certainly change the sound of your system, and it won't cost you a dime. Do I have your attention? Okay. So it has to do with the distance you sit from your speakers. Now, I polled my Facebook friends, and I asked these audiophiles out there that I know, how far do you sit from your speakers? And the answers came back. They were all over the place, but the majority of people listen from about, between 7 and 9 feet away from their speakers, which is pretty much what I expected. Big chunk of my audiophile life, that's how far I was sitting from my speakers. Right now, from the Cornwall speakers, my main speakers, my quote, reference speakers, I'm sitting about 10 feet away. And that changed. I used to be closer before this room changed around, but now 9.5, 10 feet, depending on what else is going on. And I like that. I really, really do. But sometimes I can rearrange things, at least temporarily, and sit 13 to 14 feet away from them. And you know what? They sound even better. So sometimes close sounds the best, meaning 3 to 5 feet might be the best for your speakers. And maybe where you are now, it's 7 or 8 or 9 feet. That might be it, but I want you to think about getting further away or closer. But anyway, the idea for this started a really, really long time ago. In, I guess, the early 1980s, when I was working at Sound by Singer, and we sold acoustat electrostatic speakers. And the way the room at the end of the store, the furthest away from the front door, was situated, you could see the left speaker all the way down the hall to that. It was about maybe, let's say, 50 feet away. And when we were playing music over those acoustat speakers, and I was standing really far away from them like that, I was thinking, that sounds amazing, because a conventional box speaker, a direct radiating speaker, one with a tweeter and a woofer and a mid-range, they could never do that. If you stood 40 feet away from a box speaker, it would sound quieter, obviously, but it also just wouldn't project sound forward like that. So yes, acoustats, being dipoles, electrostatic panel speakers, they put out as much sound out of their backside as their front, and they had very little dispersion to the sides and very little reflection off the floor and ceiling, so they could project sound really far. Now, of course, it wasn't as loud when I was 40 feet away from them, but a lot of the sound, the goodness of the sound, was intact over long distances. So I was thinking about that, and I decided to take these Magnapan LRS Plus speakers and set them up at this end of the room, closer to the windows, where I could get really far away from them, 35 feet away in this room. And that's what I did. But I didn't start at 35 feet away. I started out at about, I think, 11 feet away. And they were sounding really, really good at 11 feet away. So I took the chair, I moved it back, and I was 15 feet away. It's like, this is good. I really, really like this. And I moved back. Now, the thing is, as you move back, as you move further away, yes, the sound gets quieter. You have to adjust the level, and you have to adjust the distance between the left and right speakers. Yes, yeah, I know that. And toe in, although when you're really far away, there's no toe in. They're just firing straight ahead. But I realized I was listening to this Macy Gray recording, I think about 15, 16 feet away, and I was thinking, that sounds so much more believably real in terms of the scale, the sizes of the instruments in the recording. Macy Gray herself, and the stand-up bass, and the drums, and the electric guitar. They just had a sense of, yeah, I could, it was one of those, I could close my eyes and say, yeah, there's real people over there playing music. Now, as I got closer to them, when I was at a normal 8-foot distance, I was more aware I was listening to speakers. Now, as you get further away, even with these panels, there's more and more reflections I'm hearing, which kind of simulates the sound of being in a club or a bigger space, right? So there's a lot going on. I'm trying to get through this as logically as possible. And speaking of logical, yes, of course, there will be an audiophiliac viewer system of the day later on in today's show. Okay, so at this point, I do want to take a quick little detour to talk about how speakers, let's say, project sound into a room. Well, there's basically these three different types, at least that I'm going to be talking about today. The conventional box speaker, a direct radiating speaker, you know, the kind that have a tweeter and a woofer, or a tweeter, mid-range and woofer on the front baffle. Everybody knows what that is. You probably have that type of speaker. The second type of speaker is the horn speaker that has a horn-loaded tweeter and possibly also a horn-loaded mid-range and maybe a horn-loaded woofer. And they project sound forward with less reflections, less dispersion, so there's less reflections off the floor, the walls, and the ceiling than the direct radiating type that I talked about first. So that's a big advantage when you want to sit further away from the speakers. Then the third type is the dipole speaker, a panel speakers that project just as much sound out of their backside as their front. 50-50. And they're called dipoles, and they fill the room in a very different way. But one key advantage is that they do not project sound sideways, or not much sound out of their side. So the sound is forward and back, very little to the side, so the sidewall reflection issue is far less of a concern with a dipole speaker. And they don't project sound vertically much either. So matter of fact, when you stand up next to a Magnepan LRS and you're taller than the LRS, you won't hear much high frequencies because you're above the speaker. And therein lies part of the fun of today's experiment with listening to different types of speakers at different distances. Now, when I did this experiment for the box speaker that I used for today's test, I used the ELAC Unify reference, which really it was startling how fast it dropped off after about 10 feet away. By the time I was 12 feet away, it was just too mushy. It was just too vague sounding. As I got closer, the sound tightened up, the imaging was nicer. I mean, everything was clearer, more distinct as I got closer to the ELACs. So as near-field monitors, they were the best. They were the best of all the speakers I tried because, well, they have concentric mid-range tweeter drivers, so that helps the focusing. And by the way, I did have them about 50 inches away from the wall behind them, which is the windows here. So I had the ELACs 50 inches away from the wall. I sat 4 feet away from them. They were towed in, and I'm playing recordings, and they just utterly disappeared. It's just spooky because I was hearing a very high ratio of direct sound coming from the speaker and a relatively small percentage of sound as in room reflections. And when you do that, it's really kind of magical because the speakers, you're getting closer, but they have become, well, they disappear more as sound sources, especially with mono recordings. Mono recordings, which I'm not generally into, are amazing near field because the sound just has such depth, just this straight line that goes back between the center of the two speakers. So that was phenomenal. So yeah, like I said, I'm jumping around here and I apologize for that, but I'm just giving you my experience of playing around with distance. So the comments on the Facebook post that I put up about how far do you sit from your speaker, I'm going to put up a bunch right now. They kind of run the gamut. Some are close, listeners, some are far. Yeah, the average is 7, 8, 9 feet, but there's some great little stories, great little nuggets in those comments. So I want to thank everybody who commented when I put up that query on Facebook, especially this guy, Angelo. Oh my Lord, look at those speakers. They are freaking gigantic. I think they're JBLs. So my job here is to push you, to urge you to try these things, to just try getting closer or getting further away. Now, generally speaking, it's easier to get closer than it is to get further away, unless you have a really big room. Most people's rooms aren't huge. So yes, if you have stand-mount speakers, absolutely. If you have not gigantic tower speakers, floor-standing speakers, definitely give it a try. And try to get as close as 4 feet away from the speakers, because you want more or less an equilateral triangle between you and the speakers, right? So you might have to push them closer together. But if you can pull them as far out from the wall as possible when you're doing the near-field experiment, I'd recommend it. You don't have to, but it would help. And just do it and see what happens. Play a variety of recordings, especially recordings with terrific imaging, and you may be blown away, to use that line. You may be blown away by what you hear when you get that close and you reduce the amount of hearing the room around you and you're just hearing the sound coming off the speakers. Now, if you have horn speakers, large horn speakers, Klipsch, JBL, Avant-Garde, or whatever, getting further away from them, if possible, yeah, if you can get to 15 feet, 18, 20 feet away from them, see what happens. And I think you will be shocked by how much bigger and more lifelike the sound becomes when you're further away from those speakers. It's really kind of thrilling because it's in there. It's been there all along. But when you were too close to those speakers, I don't know, maybe the sound didn't coalesce quite as well. But what I could get 20 feet away from, and even 35 feet away from, were these little Magnepan LRS panels. Because I'm over here by the windows, but I went over to the other end of this space by the kitchen, and I was 35 feet away from them. And I had to turn up the volume. I did, more than a little. And I was playing Chicago, the band Chicago, Chicago 3, and the brass and the bass and the thing. It just, I was shocked. I'm listening to speakers that are $995 a pair. And there was this sense of people. There's people over there playing instruments and singing. It's incredible. I think they sound good at normal distances, which is usually 8 to 10 feet away from them right now for me. So yeah, when I moved further away from them, I was in the happy zone. Absolutely. And I was amazed. I truly was by what these little speakers can do in terms of scale. Now, you know, I will say the one thing, it was a disappointment, not surprisingly, with the LRS as I moved further away. And I was asking them to fill more and more of the room, even though they project sound forward and very little to the sides. You know, the bass, I wish for a little more bass. So yes, if you wind up going in this direction with any panel speaker, there's a greater likelihood that you would want to add subwoofers to the system. So that's also part of the mix. But just in terms of the experimentation phase, if you have Maggies or other panel speakers, try getting as far away as possible and then, let's say, work your way forward. So I did try listening to the Maggies in the near field from about 4 feet away. And you know what? It was good, but they're just, I think they're too big to be listened to up close like that. It was okay. I was kind of frustrated because compared to the ELAC Unify reference, which just like popped into focus and it was like, yikes, there it is. The LRS that close just sounded like I was listening too close to them. So you could try it as an experiment. Maybe you'll figure out something that I didn't figure out. But yeah, small speakers. And you know what would be fantastic for this, of course, is the KEF LS50 Meta, which I didn't have time to do today, but that would also be just unnatural. But as I've said many, many times before, playing around with speaker placement can definitely yield improvements. And if not improvements, you will definitely learn a lot about the sound of your speakers in your room. You know, and of course, if possible, and I know it isn't in a lot of situations, but if possible, try putting the speakers on a different wall in that room that you already have. Again, for experimental purposes, if not necessarily their final resting place. Anyway, it is now time for the Audiophiliac Viewer System of the Day. This one comes from Jared. He lives in Baltimore, Maryland. He is a part-time furniture maker, so he made the cabinet, the speaker stands, and also the headphone stand you see in these two pictures. As for the system, he has Monitor Audio Silver 50 6th generation, a Rogue Audio Sphinx V3 amp, also a Pioneer SX550 receiver. These switches between the Pioneer and the Rogue. CD player is a Marantz CD6007. There's a Blue Sound Node streamer. As for headphones, he has two sets there, Grado RS2Es and Grado SR225E, and the headphone amp is a Schiit Valley 2 Plus. Thanks, Jared, for sending this in. All right, we are back. My name is Steve Guttenberg, and I am the Audiophiliac. thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for listening or watching this far into the episode. I truly appreciate it. If you like what I'm doing here on the channel, I'd urge you to consider joining my Patreon. That's one of the reasons this channel has been able to continue year after year, coming up on 5 years. Thanks so much to my patrons that are out there. I've had some of you guys since as soon as I started the Patreon, which is about 4 years ago. That is mind-blowing. So yeah, if you've stuck in for the long haul, extra special thanks. But a lot of people, they come around for a year or two or a few months at a time. They get what they need and they move on. That's fine. And by the way, you can pay for your Patreon in dollars, pounds, and euros. And then, of course, the other thing you can do, which you can do easily, is just to hit that like button for the videos that you like. The algorithm favors YouTubers that have lots of likes. Oh, the other thing I'd like you to consider doing is speak up. Speak up in the comments. It's mostly a pretty friendly place, I think so. And I do try to respond, at least in the early days after posting a video, to the commenters. And yeah, I would appreciate if you would do that. And by the way, if you have experimented with speaker placement, close, far, whatever, please speak up in today's comments. And oh, yes, I do have a podcast. It's sort of in a holding pattern right now. I put up 20 episodes. I was posting 1 episode a week. I'm on hiatus from that, but I will add to it, but not at that frequency anymore. And I have a website just for the podcast, and I will show you that right now, and it's linked to below. Or you can you can listen to the podcast on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, on Google, iHeartRadio, all the usual places. And if you have yet to subscribe to this channel, oh yeah, please consider subscribing and join the 216,000 audiophiles worldwide who come here and meet and converse with each other in the comments. That's it. That's all I got for today. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for watching, and I really, really do hope to see you back here again very, very soon. Bye-bye.